When husbands started dropping like flies in 17th century Rome.
When in Rome.
Yes. Please go on.
Giulia Tofana was uncovered as the mastermind behind sales of a tonic nicknamed Murder in a Bottle. After 600 mysterious deaths,
What?
the foundations of the deeply religious and exclusively patriarchal society were all aquiver. Welcome to Crimes from History. We're travelling away from England for this one.
I'll be right here when you get back.
And we're off to beautiful but deadly 17th century Italy to meet Giulia Tofana, possibly the most rampant killer to have ever lived, and yet you've probably never heard of her. She's thought to be responsible for the murders of a staggering 600 men during a killing career spanning 3 decades in Renaissance Rome. Put into perspective, that's more than double the number of victims of the world's most prolific known modern serial killer, British doctor Harold Shipman, who had around 250 known victims.
I've been advised to stand and let you take a photograph and then go away. And I'm sure you've had enough time to take a decent photograph.
Is it possible for you just to say anything at all?
I'm back into surgery to do my surgery.
But you have said you have nothing to hide, sir.
Giulia created and sold her deadly homemade poison, eponymously named Aqua Tofana, to wives of the aristocrats and noblemen of Rome. Her murder in a bottle enterprise allowed the wives to escape miserable marriages, evade suspicion or implication, and secure their healthy spousal inheritances. Some sweet, sweet money. Despite her remarkable body count and fascinating story, Giulia Tofana remains to this day one of the most elusive, mysterious, and controversial figures in Italian history. Very little is known about Giulia Tofana's early life, and most of what we do know is subject to speculation. It could all be bollocks, but I'll tell you anyway. She was probably born near the Sicilian city of Palermo sometime around the year 1620. Giulia was the daughter of a woman named Tofana de Mardo, who I hope is not spinning in her grave after that pronunciation of her name. I think I got it right. So, Tofana was executed in 1633, accused of murdering her husband with a mysterious homemade poison,
the like of which the world has never seen the like of which.
After her mother's execution, Giulia fled to Rome, where in the decades that followed, hundreds of men succumbed to a fate eerily similar to that which had befallen her father. An unexplained and sudden illness affecting previously young and strong gentlemen, which led invariably to death. Despite being just 13 years old at the time of her mother's execution, many believed that Tofana had passed the recipe for her lethal concoction onto her daughter Giulia, who took this secret recipe with her when she fled and began supplying it surreptitiously to noblewomen of Rome's high society.
Do you do poison?
No, sir, just shit. This is Skegness.
In order to truly understand Giulia Tofana and the demand for her Aqua Tofana potion, we must first try to understand the social conditions of Renaissance Italy. 17th century Roman society was strictly class-based, deeply religious, and exclusively patriarchal.
Lads!
For most women, the only way to survive financially was either to enter into an arranged marriage or to become a sex worker. Often, women lived their entire lives as little more than the property of their fathers first and their husbands later, auctioned off by their fathers to the highest bidder. With no financial independence or legal rights and very little liberty, women were trapped in loveless, miserable, or abusive marriages. Divorce was an impossibility in this profoundly Catholic society. Death was the only way to escape an unhappy marriage. So common was the act of wives murdering their husbands at the time that these poisons were jokingly known as inheritance powders. Simply put, Aqua Tofana provided what many Roman wives so desperately sought: an escape from marriage and the promise of financial security. Although the exact makeup of Giulia's Aqua Tofana remains elusive, it probably had 3 main ingredients: arsenic, lead, and belladonna, known as deadly nightshade. Tasty. These were blended together in a highly specialised and specific way to create an undetectable, colourless and odourless liquid. This concoction could easily be slipped into the food or wine of unsuspecting victims.
Did you just try to poison me?
The genius of Aqua Tofana lay in its ability to kill slowly, softly and without suspicion. By administering a drop here and a drop there over the course of a few days, weeks or even months, the murderer had complete control over the time it took to eliminate her victim. The effects of the poison would mimic the symptoms of a sudden and terminal illness not wholly uncommon during the period. The first dose would often produce mild, cold-like symptoms and nausea, nothing out of the ordinary there. The second dose would cause sickness, vomiting and diarrhea. By the third or fourth dose, the victim would experience severe dehydration and burning sensations in their stomach. The condition gradually worsened until eventually death was upon them. The slow mortality process meant that the husbands had time to repent their sins before death. More importantly though, the husbands had time to prepare their will. Sensing that their death was inevitable and having no notion of their wife's murderous actions, the husbands wanted to ensure that their soon-to-be widows would be saved from a life of peasantry and poverty upon their expiration.
According to the wishes of Mr. Carrington, Dominic Devereux is appointed the will's executor.
I'll fight this travesty through every possible court and I'll break it.
At autopsy, Aqua Tofana was undetectable, absolving the wives of any suspicion or guilt and ensuring their freedom and prosperity, whilst they duly played the part of the grieving widow. In a cunning and somewhat ironic marketing trick, Giulia disguised her potion in a glass cosmetics bottle adorned with an ornate image of St. Nicholas. Manna di San Nicola was a transparent oil-like liquid that was said to drip abundantly from the remains of the saint. Ugh, that sounds horrible. Prized for its anti-blemish properties, Manna di San Nicola was a common tincture found on dressing tables of noblewomen and peasants alike. The husbands of the imminent widows were happily oblivious to the fact that this saintly cosmetics bottle was not, in fact, filled with saint juice, but rather it concealed the fluid of their imminent death. The irony, or perhaps poetic justice here, is that St. Nicholas was often portrayed as the protector of unmarried women who would guide them into marriage and protect them in matrimony. Such was the notoriety of Aqua Tofana during the late 1600s that it was often used as a generic catch-all term for the many slow poisons of the period, of which it was both the best known and most deadly. The succession of mysterious deaths of affluent men struck a deep fear into the city's noblemen. Inevitably, gossip abounded, and before long, rumours began circulating of an inconspicuous, mysterious and deadly poison known as Aqua Tofana. These rumours and fears would endure well into the next 2 centuries, where scholars and historians continued to fervently debate both its makeup and its maker, long after Giulia herself was dead. Over 100 years later, the great composer Mozart, upon the onset of a sudden and severe illness from which he would never recover, exclaimed that his symptoms were the result of Aqua Tofana poisoning, and yet despite its infamy,
Infamy! Infamy! They've all got it in for me!
There is very little evidence that Aqua Tofana ever existed, at least not in the form that it was reported by scholars of the period. Over the years, many scientists, researchers and chemists have attempted to recreate such a lethal yet undetectable poison whose administration could be specifically tailored to the murderer's desired timeline, and all have failed.
Please. I'm not dying. That was just some acting.
Could it be that Giulia and her mother were genius alchemists whose skills remain unmatched and undiscovered to this day? Or could it be that the acute precision and unrivaled deadliness of Aqua Tofana was the exaggerated product of a moral panic that had gripped the upper echelons of early modern European society? Giulia Tofana was no lone vigilante in her poisoning career. Her profession was deeply embedded with a complex and far-reaching network of organised crime.
Forget about it?
Often commanded by criminals who were highly connected and well respected amongst the aristocracy, the clergy, and nobility. These criminals included alchemists, astrologers, apothecaries, abortionists, witches, and priests who could procure obscure ingredients or cast spells for affluent Romans who were willing to pay high prices.
How much is it? Check okay? Fine.
Historians refer to these organisations as criminal magic underworlds, and they likely existed in every major town and city across 17th century Europe. Occult, magical, and heretic activities have been fiercely denounced and outlawed by the Catholic Church, but hidden in plain sight, operating from the great churches, villas, and basilicas of Rome, formed these unsavoury congregations. I think they sound quite fun. I'd join, but only for some light mischief if someone had pissed me off, not murder. Just, I don't know, make them shit themselves? Anyway, Giulia most likely procured her cache of poison from Father Girolamo, a shadowy priest working from a church at the centre of Rome. Father Girolamo's brother was an apothecary with unlimited access to the kind of lethal ingredients that Giulia would have needed to create her tonic. The poisoning sector of these criminal magical underworlds was almost exclusively run by females known as wise women, and the overwhelming majority of their customers were women too. The wise women of Rome ran other, more orthodox lines of business alongside their poisoning rackets, often fronted by Giulia's legitimate cosmetic shop.
If the men find out we can shapeshift, they're going to tell the church.
Working closely with Giulia in her band of wise women was Girolamo Sparra, who many believed to be Giulia's daughter and who had established herself as a respectable herbalist and astrologer in Rome, creating another legitimate facade for their illicit activities. The women also offered more mystical services such as fortune-telling and other forms of hokum, which introduced them to customers who had an intrigue for the supernatural, the conspiratorial and the illegitimate, and may have had the necessity for more deathly services.
Come on, you can raise a Nazi erection, let alone the Prince of Darkness. Now come on, put your backs into it.
This allowed Giulia and her wise women to establish professional relationships with the noble women of Rome, whereby they could examine the trustworthiness of any would-be purchasers of their Aqua Tofana. After all, discretion was of the utmost importance when conspiracy to murder might carry a death sentence. Even Giulia's death is hotly debated. There are 3 different accounts of how she met her end. Some narratives claim that she simply died peacefully in her sleep under no suspicious circumstances in 1651. Others claim that Giulia's crimes were uncovered when one would-be widow got cold feet after slipping a drop of poison into her husband's soup. She panicked and confessed her murderous intent to her husband.
Shut up, Angela!
He demanded his wife give up the name of the woman who procured the poison. Giulia, along with several other wise women, was captured and tortured before confessing to the murders of over 600 men and was executed in 1659. Other accounts contest that Giulia evaded capture and fled to a convent, where she continued to make her Aqua Tofana potion, which was distributed via the nuns for decades to come. The true date and cause of her death remain a mystery. 500 years on, Giulia Tofana remains a deeply contentious figure. There are no portraits of her, no official documents recording her birth or death, and no known recipe for her poison. This elusive woman leaves a legacy not just of the bodies of hundreds of men, but centuries of questions, mysteries, and debates. Was she a malicious and calculated, organised crime ringleader, devoid of morals, scruples, or humanity, who brought murder to market and profited from the desperation of abused women in the city? Or was she the silent, shadowy saviour of countless women, mercifully liberating them from the suffering they faced at the hands of their husbands? Whatever the truth, one thing is for certain: Giulia Tofana was a woman who deeply threatened the misogynistic balance of power in Renaissance Roman society, and whose legacy struck fear and foreboding into noblemen in Europe for centuries to come. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, I always love that, and I'll see you soon. Sweet dreams.